Great. So, so we're in this series exploring ritual. So how many people here have done any kind of Buddhist ritual here, either here at the London Buddhist Centre or on one of our retreats or something like that? Put your hands up if you have. Okay, so quite a lot of you haven't. I'm going to say a little bit about ritual, slightly by way of a bit of a recap from last week. But I suppose, I'm not going to be able to recap everything from last week, which was the opening session of this, but hopefully I can give you a little bit of a flavour. So I was looking up sort of definitions of ritual, as Akasha Mitra was saying last week, this idea of ritual, it's quite a sort of modern people like us can have quite a complex relationship to the idea of any kind of ritual that even vaguely looks religious in some way. Some people really like that, other people are very wary of it for a whole range of reasons. So it can often be, I'd say when we do introductory retreats, the most common thing that people sort of struggle with or have a reaction to, if you like, is the ritual element of it, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to do this series, to try and really unpack a bit more about what ritual is for us, and how it can be valuable to our practice. So one of the definitions I found, a definition of ritual as shared action, expressive of common strivings, rooted in common values and with a symbolic expression. So I'll say that again, a shared action. So ritual's usually a collective practice. Expressive of common strivings. So in this situation, in this context, any kind of shared ritual we do is based on our sort of shared interest or commitment to the Buddha and his teachings. Rooted in common values, again, a sort of a shared sense of having in lighting a candle and offering it onto a shrine, onto an altar, towards something. So what's the purpose of ritual? So ritual brings people together physically, because usually it's a shared practice, but it also brings people together spiritually. For those of you who've been on retreat, sometimes it can be, especially if you're in silence, you spend the day sort of in your own world, in your own meditation practice, then coming together to do a common ritual, suddenly you're there and you're connecting with everybody else, and you're all sharing out loud, if you like, explicitly, your spiritual practice. So it brings people together physically and spiritually. There can be a sense of solidarity as well, when we're all sort of doing the same thing at the same time with the same words. There can be a coming together, a sense of solidarity. And often, particularly in spiritual rituals, there's an aesthetic element to it as well. So there's a sense of something beautiful. In most traditions, any kind of ritual will be set up in a way that has some beauty connected with it. So we have a shrine here and we try to make it look beautiful. Even coming into the shrine room and setting up your mats and sitting down in here, that is part of a sort of a ritualistic way of coming to practice together, in a way. Would you feel the same about coming to a Buddhist centre and sitting down and meditating, if we were just sort of basically, sitting in some conference room somewhere, with nothing, with no flowers, no candles, no images, nothing. You just literally an empty room and we were all sitting in it. It's better than nothing, but it's not really the same, is it, than stepping into a sacred space. It's one of the things. One of my personal things is I own it as my personal thing. I really, really don't like people having their phones on in the shrine room. And for me, I think that's something about it being a sacred space, and that's part of the ritual of it all for me, and partly showing my age as someone who remembers shrine rooms when there were no phones in them. So all of those things are important. And one of the things that I've come to realise about myths, when I first came along, I was very... I come to realise about ritual. I was very sort of anti it when I first came along. I wanted to learn to meditate. I wasn't interested in any of that religious mumbo jumbo or woo-woo stuff. It was not what I was here for. But one of the things that has changed is there is something really mysterious that happens if you let it when we're doing ritual. And it's like one of the ways Sangharajta speaks about it, who's the founder of our movement, is that ritual sort of touches parts of our psyche that are not our sort of rational, conscious mind. They're not our rational, intellectual, educated, conscious, modern, like to think I'm a bit sophisticated part of my mind. It touches something much more primal. And if you think back to the most ancient of cultures, every culture, as far as we know, that has ever been discovered anywhere in the world, there was always ritual. So there's something very primal in the human psyche, that ritual, a part of us that is fed by ritual. And that in our modern world, we sort of have so little of that really now, don't we? I mean, we have weddings and funerals and they obviously are rituals. They're important rituals. They're legal. Some of them are legal rituals. But apart from that, in our modern world, there isn't a great deal where we would all come together and do the same thing. And I was, apart from marriages and funerals, I was thinking, one time when I thought, oh yes, this is a modern ritual, is I just live just round the corner, practically opposite a pub. So when the football games are on, whether I want to know what's going on in the football game or not, it is blatantly clear to me. So one ritual that I learned from, I think it was the Euros maybe a few years ago or something, is a particular mantra, which is, looking back on when we first met, something, and I cannot forget. Southgate, you're the one, you still turn me on, football's coming home again. So that was the mantra that I was, hearing as I was sort of in my room doing whatever I was doing. It was kind of loud and annoying, but there was also something really I quite like the song, to be honest. I like a bit of Atomic Kitten, but to be honest, there was also something really moving about it, and I could hear these voices blaring out from the pub garden, and it was, I could hear from the voices, it was men and women and people of all different ages and little kids and everybody was, that was a ritual. It was a ritual of people coming together, supporting their country towards, in this particular context. So that's one ritual, sort of a modern ritual. I'd probably draw the line at calling it a spiritual ritual, but maybe if you're a really real football supporter, you would disagree with me on that. So there's something about ritual that brings us all together, that is a solidarity, a collective practice, and creates some kind of a special atmosphere. So that's something a bit general about ritual. So I'm going to say a little bit now about ritual in a Buddhist context. So one way of thinking about what we're doing when we're doing a Buddhist ritual is that we're standing in front of a shrine, an image or a statue of the Buddha, and various other like lights and candles and incense that are sort of symbolically linked to the Buddha. standing in front of a shrine, and we are opening up to something bigger than ourselves. We are opening up to the idea that there is more to the world than just little me and all my attempts to get what I want and be happy. Not that there's anything wrong with getting what you want or being happy, but there's got to be more. There's got to be more to life than that. I'm another guilty admission now. So I'm binge watching Mad Men at the moment on Netflix. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's a beautifully done series. But there's lots of things I could say about it, lots of dharmic reflections on it. But it's basically about the advertising executives on Madison Avenue in New York in the 1960s, when advertising was just really beginning to kick off, sort of post-war, and the whole American dream thing was really going great guns, and everything was about selling, about consuming and selling and buying. And what really strikes me about this is that there's all these people with these seemingly wonderful lives, with loads of money and beautiful clothes and beautiful wives and all the rest of it. But you can just see they're so unhappy. They're so unhappy. And every now and again, one of them will say something like, well, this can't be it. This can't be it. And I find that really moving, because they are pursuing what they've been told to pursue in order to make themselves happy, what their culture has brought them to, and yet it's got that emptiness. For those, and these are the people who are really there, they've got the money, the car, the beautiful wife, the beautiful children, all the status, all the rest of it, and they're just like, is this it? Is this what I've been trying to do? Is this really, So in a way, coming back to the idea of ritual, when we open to ritual, we're opening to an idea, or we're allowing ourselves to entertain an idea that there is more to this mysterious thing called life than we can fathom with our rational, sensible, grown-up 21st century minds. There is more, there is something more. And that is represented by us, a collective practice of opening up to ritual. So this particular ritual, the sevenfold puja that we're exploring over these weeks on Monday nights, it's got seven sort of verses to it, or 7 sections to it, which is kind of like 7. There's all sorts of ways of thinking about what each of one. But you could think of it as 7 different flavours of turning towards this idea of something beyond us, something bigger than us. And it's a selection of verses written by an enlightened monk from the 8th century called Shantideva. So hundreds and hundreds of years these verses have been used by practitioners to help them to open up to the inspiration of the transcendental. So if you want to know about the first 2 verses, worship and salutation, we will try and translate some of the. Some of it is kind of quite old-fashioned English, a word like salutation that we don't tend to use so much. But anyway, Akasha Mitra talked about worship and salutation last week, so you can look him up on YouTube to hear what he had to say about all that. What I'm going to talk more about today is the 3rd verse of the sevenfold puja, which is called Going for Refuge. It's a Going for Refuge verse. So what does this phrase, going for refuge, it's such a centrally important concept within Buddhism, particularly within Triratna Buddhism, which is this kind of Buddhism that we're doing here. And actually, I think I'm just going to read you the verse first. Some of you, of course, will be familiar with this and some of you won't. So this is the Going for Refuge section of the Sevenfold Puja. It's not very long. This very day, I go for my refuge to the powerful protectors whose purpose is to guard the universe, the mighty conquerors who overcome suffering everywhere. Wholeheartedly also I take my refuge in the Dharma they have ascertained, which is the abode of security against the rounds of rebirth. Likewise, in the host of bodhisattvas, I take my refuge. Now, for those of you who might have come to Maitreya Bandhu's talks on Saturday mornings during the meditation challenge, this is the verse that he was unpacking there. So I'm going to be shamelessly plagiarising some of his ideas this evening. But so here we have this verse, this very day I go for my refuge to the powerful protectors whose purpose is to guard the universe. So what this verse is talking about is it is giving us a sense of what is a Buddhist context. So in the traditional Buddhist East or in ancient times, people were born into a Buddhist culture, so they wouldn't have had to think about what is the context in which I'm practicing, because their whole world was, everything was in line with the Buddhist ideas. But we don't live in that world. We live in a very different world. We don't have the context of what is a Buddhist world. So as I was saying earlier, our context, certainly the context that I can look back now and see that I grew up with, and did my parents, is this idea that what I need to do is to make a good living so that I can have as much pleasure as possible before the lights go out and I die. And that's, in a nutshell, what my parents wanted for me. Got to study well, got to do well in your exams, purpose being to get a good job, purpose being to make money, purpose being for money to make you happy. And then, that's basically what it's about before you die. And it's not a very, as Maitreya Bandhu was saying in his teaching, it's a bit bleak. I find that a bit bleak as a context. And in contrast, what we're being given here in this Going for Refuge verse, this very day I go for my refuge to the powerful protectors whose purpose is to guard the universe, the mighty conquerors who overcome suffering everywhere. So rather than going for refuge to money, success, status, which is what I was sort of brought up to do, this is saying, there is these forces or these realms out there beyond ours, and they are loving and they are powerful and they want us to grow. So, and even as I say that, I think, that to some people that's probably just going to sound really, way too religious or something like that. But yeah, all I can say is this is the context that the Buddha was born into, and that the Buddhists down the centuries and in the Buddhist East, that's much more this culture rather than our Western culture. So this idea that there is this whole context that is bigger than my tiny mind, and it's a loving, protective context. If I can trust it, if I can open to it, practice within it, trust it, go for refuge to it, then I can grow. And that is where to put my, that's what I can trust. That's the only security that I can trust, because anything here in this world will sooner or later sooner or later will let us down or go away, and that's just the way it is. So this is putting our trust, our refuge in something bigger, something that transcends this world of time and space that we spend most of our time in. And one way of thinking of this is there's much more to you than you. There's much more to you than just what you think of as you. And that actually, from a Buddhist perspective, what you think of as you is deeply and profoundly interconnected into these realms of beauty and transcendence beyond time and space, and protected by these powerful protectors whose purpose is to guard the universe. Now, those powerful protectors are the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, which is kind of the beings that are just very, very close to Buddhahood. So you can, from our point of view, you might as well think of them as Buddhas because they're so close to it. So the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas are all the enlightened beings that there've ever been in the universe, holding that space that we can step into. And one of Sangharakshita's, in a sense, the core teaching of Sangharakshita is that that the central act of being a Buddhist is going for refuge to the three jewels. And that every form of Buddhism the world over, they can look very different. Zen Buddhism looks very different to Tibetan Buddhism, looks very different to Chinese Buddhism. So all the form can look quite different, but actually every committed Buddhist at heart is in their own way going for refuge to the Buddha, to the Dharma, and to the Sangha. So this going for refuge is the central act of the spiritual life from a Buddhist point of view. So when we say this very day I go for refuge to the powerful protectors, we are saying this very day, not, some future date when I, get to the pearly gates and get into heaven, or go the other way and down to hell. Saying this very day I go for my refuge. This very day I want to practice to turn my life towards a greater sense of value and meaning and interconnectedness and kindness and courage and all these sort of old-fashioned but very beautiful values that seem to be being increasingly eroded in our current world. This very day I go for refuge to those values, and my practice keeps turning me towards those values as best I can. And then the final part of the verse, wholeheartedly also, I take my refuge in the Dharma that's been ascertained. So that's the teachings of the Buddha. So the truth that enables us to practice, which is the abode of security against the rounds of rebirth. So the only way to achieve freedom is to practice the Buddha's teachings to free us from our complete sort of self-obsession, our wrapped up in our small little selves. Likewise, in the host of bodhisattvas, I take my refuge. So in all the enlightened beings that have ever been, I go for refuge to them. So that's something of this verse, this going for refuge verse. So what I'm just going to suggest that we do just now is let's just sit and absorb a bit about what I've just said. So setting yourself up, we're just going to sit for a sit briefly. Okay, so sitting comfortably. We will end the evening with a period of practice. But before we do that, I just wanted to sort of open up to the larger group, really. So you're all having a bit of a chat before the tea break about ritual, about this going for refuge verse of the sevenfold puja, about Gareth Southgate. I don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, so I just wanted to open up. Is there anything that you wanted to share about that, or any questions, anything that came up in your group about ritual, about this verse? Go on, Warren.
I'm just very curious about what it is that we're seeking protection from the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas.
What are we seeking protection from?
And what does that say about our agency?
What does that say about our agency? What was that something that came up in your group, or is it something came up in your head? Yeah. Just there. Not there. Okay, so there's a good. Warren's posing a question to us. What do we think it is that we might be seeking protection from? What are the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas protecting us from? Can hear a pin drop. Yes, Rowan.
Cyclical existence.
Cyclical existence. Okay. Do you want to say a little bit more what you mean by that?
So in the verse it mentions the rounds of rebirth.
Right.
Which in a sort of literal, more traditional way would be literal rebirth, but could be considered more how we have the capacity to make our lives worse and how we have the capacity to make our lives better, and sort of try and fix our worlds in that way, and how that ultimately brings us our suffering.
Right. Yes. Good. Yes. Thank you. So that's the key thing there. I think is the relieving us from suffering. So that all of the Buddha's teachings, he would say, I teach suffering and the alleviation of suffering. So what the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas are trying to protect us from is our own behaviour that keeps causing us to keep suffering and causing suffering elsewhere. So there's the idea of pain is an inevitable, like literal sort of physical pain is an inevitable part of having a human body. So there's, that's just inevitable. But what is avoidable, what we can either make much worse for ourselves, as Rowan was saying, or make easier for ourselves, is the additional suffering that we put on top of our experience by adding to it, by the way in which we behave and the narratives, the stories that we tell ourselves about our experience. So I would say that the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas are offering us a way out of that kind of suffering, if we can just turn towards it and open up to it and take in the teachings and implement them in our own lives. What do you think of that? You're nodding. I'm wondering, does that ring true for you, or what do you think?
Well, I'm just curious because in my career I was a mental health nurse, and I could take actions that, as a protector, to protect people from safeguarding issues, abuse, and neglect, that sort of stuff. But I couldn't protect them from their own choices. So I'm just kind of, I think Rowan's explanation there was great, but I'm still just wondering, I'm still a bit confused about where our agency is, and what does it mean? What are we actually doing by going for refuge in terms of our own agency?
Yeah, well, I can throw that open to see if anyone else wants to, but I think one way I would answer that is that there isn't, like, going for refuge is something that you just do. As your practice deepens, your going for refuge deepens. So the answer to that question kind of gets more and more involved the more and more you practice. But the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, they're not. How can I put it? They're not.
Little pixies that come down and carry you away.
No, they're not little pixies that come down and carry you away. That's true, too. At least, I don't know, maybe. Anyway, I say that, no, they're not, but actually, I don't know, maybe some of them are. They're not sort of, they're not going to wave, they're not your fairy godmother. They can't wave a magic wand and make it all okay. In fact, it's very much about our agency. It's about taking an absolutely, it's quite what's the word? Oh, can't think what the word is. Go on, what do you think that word is?
It's relationship. It's a relationship with your intention.
It's a relationship with your intention.
Yeah.
Say a bit more.
So in case of like mental health, when a person's in distress, they're going into A&E and having fits and everything like that. They are very much involved in the chaos of the moment. It's when you're involved in the chaos of the moment, it's not the magic pixies coming down and like, oh, okay, everything is fine. It's when you're in the space like you are now, you're making a clear intention on taking refuge. You're making a clear intention on your action of personal development, and it's about your relationship to that intention. So it's like, it's making it a clear, sincere action as opposed to something a bit more sarcastic.
Yeah. I can see what you mean by that. Yeah. What I was going to say, which isn't not exactly what you said, Michael, but not a million miles away, was I was going to say, what's very radical about the Buddhist teaching is that we have to 100% take responsibility for our own mental states, 100%. And that is really challenging because personally, there's nothing I like more than being able to blame someone else for why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. So I think there's something very fundamental in the teachings about our agency and how we have to take it. We really have to take responsibility for our minds completely. So the protection is more in the teaching us the tools by which we can learn how to protect ourselves, if you like.
Yeah.
Maybe that's one way of thinking about it. Okay. Anybody else got any sort of thoughts, reflections? Jay-Z? Was that you waving at me? Yeah, it was.
It was just about going for refuge to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. In a way, you could take it in a literal sense and think of it as a deity, but actually you can think of it as you're going forth towards perfections or ethics or virtues. Say, for example, you go for refuge to Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. You go for refuge towards compassion in a way that you are protecting yourself from everything else through compassion, or Amitabha or Bodhisattva or any other Buddhist figures, but not in a literal sense that a demon's going to come out, but more of a, I don't know, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's hard to speak about, isn't it? Because we're not talking about them as deities, as gods, as you were saying. But there's something there, like this principle of these qualities, these perfections, I think was the word you used, Jay-Z. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions or observations or about this going for refuge, or more generally about ritual? Yes, hello.
It's just something that came up for me just now is I've heard several references to sort of this practice being working on the mind with mind. I don't know if anyone has heard that or resonates with that. So practice of meditation, we're working on our minds with our minds.
Yeah.
And so perhaps the refuge being, it's partly referenced just before, is protecting ourselves, protecting our minds from our minds.
Yes, that's one way of thinking about it. That what it boils down to, I think, in our within our personal practice is that if we're practicing effectively, we're protecting ourselves from from being our own worst enemy in a way, as Rowan was saying. Something Mitra Bandhu says as well is like, whatever you're doing, you can always really easily make it worse, and I certainly can recognise that in my own life. I can very, very easy to make it worse. So there's something there about practicing with your own mind in order to try to make it better rather than worse in terms of your own experience. I think the going for refuge aspect opens it up beyond that individual mind, and that sense that there's a transcendental principle that we can open up and sort of tap into that can support us with that. Okay.
Sorry, could I just the idea of rituals being an accelerator to your spiritual progress. That was something that's come to me as I've progressed on the path, whereas originally I felt quite resistant to it, like you.
Right.
But actually, as I've gone through the process and now going for refuge formally, within the Triratna, then I found it an accelerator. That it actually helps to be part of it. You take it into your own practice at home. I think that's a very powerful factor for me.
Yeah, so the ritual feeds your individual practice and vice versa. Yeah, lovely, thank you. Okay, so we're going to finish off the evening then with, I'm going to say a little something else first. So just about the second part of this verse within the puja. So we've talked about it in the first half. And then what it leads on to in the context of the puja, in the context of this particular ritual, is a reciting of the 5 Buddhist precepts. Now these are universally the 5 training principles that sort of are universal across the whole Buddhist world. Sort of 5 core areas which the Buddha basically said, to the extent that you follow these training principles, your mind will be freer and calmer and happier. To the extent that you choose not to follow these training principles, your mind will be not freer, will be less free, less calm, less happy. And it's kind of up to you. So it's not a case of you must follow these things, otherwise some sort of creator God is going to punish you. It's more just like, this is the way the universe is, the fabric of the universe is such that the extent to which you follow these will be the extent to which you free your own mind. So I'm just going to tell you, because what we're going to do in a moment is we're going to we'll sit and meditate for briefly, and then we're going to do this going for refuge verse in call and response, as we would do in the puja, and then we're going to do the refuges and precepts in call and response as well. So I'm going to say a little bit about them, so that some of them are in English and some of them are not, so that you're clear what you're actually saying. So you can choose whether to say it or not, basically. The refuges and precepts, so the 3 refuges, we're basically saying, honouring the Buddha as the enlightened one. We're saying, to the Buddha for my refuge I go, to the Dharma for my refuge I go, to the Sangha for my refuge I go. And then we do that 3 times. Then we just say, for the second time, to the Buddha for my refuge I go. For the 3rd time, for the Buddha to the Buddha for my refuge I go. So that's the refuges, and then we go on to the precepts, the 5 precepts. So first of all, we chant we'll be chanting them in Pali, so you just can follow along if you choose to, in call and response. But what we're saying, the English translation of what we're saying is, so the first principle is, I undertake to abstain from causing harm to living beings. I undertake to abstain from taking the not given. So not stealing, not sort of imposing ourselves onto other people. I undertake to abstain from sexual misconduct, which in this particular case, doesn't have it's nothing to do with sexuality. It's to do with any sexual behaviour that causes harm to another being. So we're saying, I undertake to abstain from that kind of sexual behaviour. I undertake to abstain from false speech. So from lying, basically, or anything that resembles lying. And I undertake to abstain from taking intoxicants. The idea being that anything intoxicating clouds our mind. So, that can be anything that intoxicates our mind, including coffee, including Instagram, including TikTok, all of these things that can cloud our minds. So we're sort of undertaking to do our best to abstain from those sorts of things. So we'll chant those in Pali, and then you'll then the positive forms of those precepts are in English, so you'll be able to see to hear what they are as we're going along. And the positive ones are what we are aiming towards. So we're aiming towards deeds of loving kindness, open-handed generosity, stillness, simplicity, contentment, truthfulness, and mindfulness. So those are our behaviours by which we're demonstrating our going for refuge.